Hello, I'm Jerry Green, Superintendent of Pikeville Independent Schools. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to an outstanding program that you'll be seeing shortly. And first of all, we want to thank you for just spending a moment of time with us with Pikeville Independent Schools. A few years ago, someone pointed out to me that Pikeville Independent Schools was the crown jewel of our community of Pikeville, Kentucky. And hopefully by watching this presentation, you will agree and see why people are saying that. I want to give a specific thanks to our producers of this documentary, Ms. Ann Carty, a board member, and also Mr. Kevin Keene, along with Mr. Randy Roberts. We just want to thank all three of them for their immense contributions to the history of Pikeville Independent Schools. In 2015, we will be celebrating our 100th year anniversary. And the upcoming program gives you just a glimpse into the past as to why our district is truly the crown jewel of this community.
What do you think of when you hear a century, 100 years? Well, let's think for a time about our little town and the 100 years of its history, with emphasis on its educational system. In 1838, the Commonwealth passed a law to establish a system of public schools, and 10 years later, in 1848, Pike County voted a school tax. T.W. Oliver, longtime superintendent of Pikeville City Schools, would become very upset when his teachers would anticipate the weekend. He would invariably admonish them and add, "I can't wait for Monday to come so that I can fight ignorance." And there was certainly ignorance to fight, because the educational level in this area was once quite low. At the end of the 19th century, there was a scattering of one-room schoolhouses under the direction of teachers who had had probably at most 8 years of schooling and then had passed a state test to qualify to teach. In Pikeville, there was a beautiful little 4-room brick building which housed a subscription school, which parents paid to have teachers such as P.D. Dameron and J.M. Riddle instruct their children. Now, there were 2 schools in the county which offered instruction in the upper grades, 9 through 12. One of these was the Pikeville Collegiate Institute, housed in the building which now serves as our town hall, and the other was the Matthew T. Scott Academy at Phelps, neither of which was a public school, so the tuition and the distance to travel restricted enrollment. The approximately 500 people who lived in Pikeville at this time had virtually no contact with other areas. Traveling in and out of Pike County was by horse, wagon, or steamboat. But with the first passenger train, which steamed up the valley in 1905, came new ideas and the desire to move forward. In 1911, the far-sighted men of the city and county school boards cooperated to plan and build a high school, which they called the Pikeville and Pike County High School, and which would later be described by a state school inspector as the finest high school in the state. After much discussion, the boards decided to erect the building on the site of the little subscription school on 4th Street. As the construction went on, classes were held in churches, lodges, and even in some teachers' homes. Finally, in September of 1915, the building was completed and the school term opened with approximately 150 students and 9 teachers and administrators. The top floor of the building housed the high school and a crude auditorium, and the first floor held the classrooms for the little ones, and the restroom and the gym were in the basement. Restrooms. Don't you know that was a wonder in 1915? The gym in the basement was the site of the games of the first basketball team, 1916-1917. Their uniforms deny the meaning of the word uniform. And could this be the entire team? The severe-looking gentleman with the team is the first superintendent, Tobias J. Kendrick, whose term was from 1915 through 1920. A letter from Dr. Leon Childers, who taught at PHS to earn money to continue his education in dental school, tells us that, although the gym had a regulation-sized floor, the ceiling was quite low. However, since all the shots were banked against the backboard, this was no problem. He said, too, that there were benches on 2 sides of the court, but that the spectators had to stand during play to get their feet off the playing floor. Classes were 45 minutes long, and among the many demanding subjects were geometry, advanced algebra, physics, German, rhetoric, and 4 years of Latin. Because classes had been held during the construction of the building, there was a senior class that first year. However, there was only one graduate, Vernon Stump. Mr. Stump is shown here with Mr. Charles Spears and Mr. John Waddell, as Randy Roberts presents him with a copy of the 1976 Panther, which contains a history of our school up to that time. Mr. Stump said that his graduation was held at the Presbyterian Church and that the entire student body attended. O.L. Milliken followed Mr. Kendrick as superintendent, and then in 1922, a gentleman from Sturgis, Kentucky, came to Pikeville to evaluate the summer school program. This remarkable man was Tybee William Oliver, an individual of boundless energy and a tireless advocate for education. He had earned his undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of Chicago and his certificate of superintendency at Columbia University in New York. It was as if it were his destiny to come to this place and devote his life to the youth of Pikeville and Pike County. Beginning his tenure in 1922, he assembled a group of amazing instructors, had posters printed to be sent throughout the area extolling the importance of education and urging attendance at the new high school. He rode horseback up the hills and down the valleys to encourage young people and teachers to study to improve their lives. Here we see the first football team, 1925. This picture and others of the early football and basketball teams were donated to the Maroon and White Room by Cassius "Cac" Hatcher, who attended PHS and after college returned to teach and coach until he entered the service during World War II. According to Cac, this picture was made on the first day of practice. He said that a cornfield was cleared, the uprights erected, and practice began. His comment on the back of the picture, "Boy, was it dusty." The organization of the football team was made possible because the very successful basketball teams which had advanced to the state tournament in both 1924 and 1925, were invited by Alonzo Staggs to play in an invitational tournament in Chicago. The basketball players, however, voted to take the money collected for the trip to Chicago to start a football team. Incidentally, the first football game was with Logan, West Virginia, and Pikeville lost 71-0. Because the school population was increasing and the basement was needed for classrooms, the board in 1925 constructed a white wooden gym. The girls also had a basketball team. The last one was in 1930, and the girls' basketball was not revived until the 1974-75 season, when a team was organized and coached by Carolyn Hall. Among the remarkable teachers that Mr. Oliver recruited, many of whom would spend the majority of their professional lives in this system, were Rebecca Lewis, Patty Richmond, Beulah Terhune, Sally Dotson, Mr. and Mrs. Irvin Lowe, and Arthur Danberg. The 1936 Black Diamond shows 18 high school faculty members. Of these, all but one, the auto mechanics instructor who graduated from a technical school, had graduated from college with degrees in the subjects they taught. 7 had master's degrees, and 3 had coursework beyond their masters. Mr. Oliver advertised that one could complete the courses in Mr. Danberg's business department and step into a good job immediately upon graduation. Mr. Danberg also sponsored an award-winning mimeographed school newspaper beginning in 1926. Incidentally, while our school yearbook started in 1930, has had only 2 names, the Black Diamond and the Panther, our newspapers have had at least 7. With increasing enrollment, more classrooms were needed. The primary classes were moved into a new wooden building next to the gym in 1926, and to accommodate students who were coming in from the county, the boards bought the Sowards House, which was next door to the high school building, and added a dormitory in the back, which had 60 double bedrooms, 5 common rooms, and 5 bathrooms. The rent was $15 per semester, and each girl was required to work 1 hour each day. The new dorm was named Wright Hall to honor Alonzo Wright, who was at that time the county superintendent. A lot was purchased across the railroad tracks from the campus with plans for a boys' dorm, but it was never built. In 1926, construction began on yet another building, this for elementary students, although it was later used for junior high. The building, completed in 1929, held the 1,000-seat Ramsey Auditorium, named for W.M. Ramsey, the chairman of the city school board. The 1929 class was the first to graduate in the new auditorium and the first to wear caps and gowns. By 1930, there were enough high schools in the county that the joint activity of the county and city boards could be severed. The city board began to pay the county for their share of the high school building and Wright Hall, and this obligation was paid off in the early 40s. Coach Hatcher's football team was undefeated in 1935 and 1936 and lost only 1 game in 1937. One member of the team was Charles Wesley Dutch Ishmael, who was named All-State, went on to play for UK, and was later drafted by the Detroit Lions. Mr. Oliver was honored by his peers by being elected president of the Kentucky Education Association in 1938. The original school for Negro students burned, and the Perry A. Klein building was constructed by the WPA on land donated by John Bill Trivетт's grandfather. In 1954, the Supreme Court's decision in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education ended segregation in the schools. The first black students entered Pikeville High in 1957, and as soon as space was available, the elementary students entered Chloe, and Perry A. Klein closed in 1967. One of Perry A. Klein's faculty, our dearly loved Walter May Duncan, taught first grade at Chloe until she retired. Cac Hatcher continued to coach both football and basketball. Here, his assistant is John Scott. Note the team mascot, Tootsie, Cac's Boston Terrier. For a while, the B teams were called the Bulldogs. In 1943, we began the era of John Bill Trivett, a local boy who played under Adolph Rupp and came home to coach 17 years, during which he had 14 district championships, 7 15th region championships, and a total of 442 wins. In 1947, the two wooden buildings, the gym and the early elementary building, burned. Mr. Oliver and John Bill immediately began making plans for a new gym with a seating capacity of 3,000. The dedication of the new gym was in 1949. Sadly, Mr. Oliver died months before it was completed, but it was named the T.W. Oliver Memorial Gymnasium in his honor. It is difficult to try to describe the impact that this great man had in this area. He, in a large part, envisioned and formed our school system, and his spirit lives in our dreams for our students today. In spite of the many successes of Coach Trivett, he never won the state tournament. In the 1957 season, Pikeville was ranked first or second in the state for the entire year, but when the tournament time came, we lost to Lafayette. However, the team came back to defeat Russell County to take third, and Coach Trivett was named the Courier Journal Coach of the Year. Part of the loss was probably due to the '57 flood, which destroyed the gym floor. All year, the team and coaches, 20 in all, traveled in 3 cars wherever there was a place to practice or play. The '57 flood undoubtedly was the worst disaster in Pikeville history. The Big Sandy crested at 56 feet, 18 feet above flood stage. The water was 4 feet in the gym, over the tops of the first floor windows in the elementary building, and to the bottoms of the chairs in the first floor of the high school building. Unbelievably, school resumed 3 weeks later, but the class of '57 had no yearbook, no senior trip, no prom, and no state tournament win. The Trivett era ended in 1960 when both John Bill and football coach Charlie Deaton resigned to open a sporting goods store. Another outstanding educator, Charles Speers, came to his alma mater first as principal in 1959 and later as superintendent. Our system had lost its long-time accreditation by the Southern Association of Schools and Colleges because of crowding in the junior high department. Mr. Speers, now superintendent, determined that this would be rectified and led the drive to build the new elementary building on Chloe Creek Road. This building was dedicated in 1967, and the school regained its accreditation in 1970 and retains it to this day. The first principal of the new elementary school was Ivan McDaniels, Mr. Mack, who was followed by Chester Bailey, who served from 1971 until 1994, 24 years, certainly one of our school's most beloved leaders. Our school system seems to be cursed by fire. In the summer of 1969, our fine gym, which had been the focus of so much community activity, was utterly destroyed. Citizens watched with tears in their eyes while the sight of ball games, dances, Tom Thumb weddings, Teen Town, and graduations burned, destroying trophies, band uniforms, and instruments. The cause of the fire was never determined. The basketball players for the next 7 years, including Mark Myers, class of '74, the PHS all-time high scorer with 2,406 points, had no home floor. The following year, a metal building, the Blue Goose, was erected as a practice gym. The high school home games were played in the Pikeville College gym. PHS has had a long tradition of outstanding musical groups. The bands in particular have thrived under such gifted leaders as John Lewis and C.D. Wallace. In the 1970s, as many as 1/3 of the high school student body marched under the batons of C.J. Birch and Edward Pritchard, winning many awards on the regional and state levels. The high point of the '72 season was a trip to Winnipeg, Canada for the Manosphere Band competition. In 1976, PHS was poised for a new era. When Mr. Speers retired, his assistant, Mr. John Waddell, was named the new superintendent, and Mr. Tom Swartz became the high school principal. After 60 years in the original high school building, the move was made to a new facility, which was erected on the Mary Coleman property on the North Mayo Trail, and the dedication was held on October the 10th, 1976. The year, which began with such high expectations, began to go downhill. On November the 28th, a system which had already lost 2 gyms and an elementary building to fire was struck again when the old junior high building on Scott Avenue burned. Then January brought snow after snow and frigid weather, which necessitated dismissing school for almost half the month. As Superintendent Waddell asked himself what else could possibly go wrong, the rains came. In spite of Fishtrap Dam, Pikeville was flooded once again, with water cresting at 51.9 feet. The new high school, which had been occupied only 7 months, had 5½ feet of muddy water on the first floor. The elementary building, which was spared, became the headquarters for the National Guard troops, which were called in to help Pikeville citizens dig out. Once again, the mountain spirit prevailed, and the school resumed after only 14 days. And so the years and the decades move on. In 1986, the PHS team won the first ever statewide academic meet. After competing against 80 schools, our team, coached by Ann King, was presented the Governor's Cup by Martha Lane Collins. Our academic teams came in second in 1988 and 1989, and PHS has been represented in the state finals every year since. In 2010, Our junior high team was first in their division, and our high school team was third. In 1987, the Sports Hall of Fame inducted its first members. In 1988, the Modern Alumni Association was formed, and we began holding all-class reunions. Since 1990, the association has honored our most distinguished graduates. Hillard Howard brought his brand of football to Pikeville in 1972, and he never had a losing season. His teams won 3 consecutive state Class A championships in 1987, 88, and 89, and even had a write-up in People magazine. The school's 2 cheerleading squads, under the leadership of Lisa Wheeler and Jeannie Stone, have been consistent winners on the state and national levels. In 1990, the Kentucky legislature passed the Kentucky Educational Reform Act, KERA, which impacted every school in the Commonwealth and put Kentucky in the forefront of educational reform in the nation. In 1993, the golf team, led by Grover Justice, won the Kentucky Invitational Tournament for the first time. In 1995, a new 999-seat auditorium and a junior high addition were constructed. In 1999, Dave Thomas, now assistant high school principal, took the basketball Panthers to the state tournament for the first time since the Trivet years. In 2002, Mr. Jerry Green was named Pikeville's new superintendent. In 2006, a new administration building named for longtime Superintendent John Waddell was dedicated. In 2007, Robert Jones became elementary principal, and the Maroon and White Room, a museum and resource center dedicated to preserving our school's history, was opened. To our knowledge, Pikeville is the only public school in Kentucky with such a facility. And in 2010, Michael Rowe was named high school principal. We in Pikeville realize that our most precious resource is not coal or gas, but the minds of our youth. Our wisest investment is not in stocks or bonds, but the education of our children. The history of education in Pikeville records that its citizens have always sought to provide the tools necessary for that vital task. Our schools have had the unwavering support of our taxpayers, who have never failed to pass a bond issue to allow construction of needed facilities. We have been blessed to have had board members, administrators, faculty, staff, and students who strive for excellence. And so our school, in this age of mergers, has endured for 95 years, and Lord willing, in 5 more years, we will gather to celebrate its 100th anniversary.